Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still amazed at how it all played out. I run a small property development company that specializes in creating high-end residential communities. I'm in my early 30s, but I look younger and tend to dress casually, so people often underestimate me. About 2 years ago, I completed my latest project, a small, exclusive development of 20 modern homes. I kept the best lot for myself and built my dream house there, complete with a beautiful infinity pool that serves as both my personal sanctuary and a testing ground for new pool technologies I might incorporate into future developments. Everything was peaceful until this woman moved in next door about 3 months ago. Let me call her the neighbor since I want to keep this anonymous. She's probably in her late 50s, and from day one, she appointed herself as the unofficial community watchdog, the kind of person who thinks spending a lot of money on a house gives her the right to control everyone around her. The trouble started on a sunny afternoon when I was in my pool testing out this new underwater cleaning drone. It's practically silent and maps the pool floor for optimal cleaning patterns. I was floating on a raft, watching this thing work, when I heard this loud voice from the fence. The neighbor was standing there with her arms crossed, looking like she'd just witnessed a crime. She informed me that commercial activities were strictly forbidden in residential areas, and that my little science experiments were lowering the neighborhood's tone. She complained about the noise from my machinery, which was hilarious since the drone was quieter than a whisper. I politely explained that this was my private property, and the equipment was for personal use. She scoffed and said this was an HOA community where rules applied to everyone, and she'd be reporting this violation. I found it amusing since I knew exactly who she'd be reporting to, but I decided to see how far she'd take things. What followed was a campaign of petty harassment that would have been impressive if it wasn't so annoying. She started leaving copies of HOA bylaws in my mailbox with the no commercial activity clause circled in red ink. Every time I used my pool, she'd stand at her window with her phone, obviously recording me like I was some kind of criminal. A few days later, I had a couple friends over for a quiet swim. We were just floating around having normal conversation when the neighbor stormed over to the fence. She started yelling that I was running an unlicensed public pool and that my rowdy parties were a nuisance. She threatened to file a formal complaint with the HOA management company. I calmly told her she should do whatever she felt was necessary. This non-reaction seemed to infuriate her even more. She probably saw it as the arrogance of some young rule breaker, not realizing she was talking to the guy who literally owned everything around us. Sure enough, a few days later I found a long, detailed email in the official HOA management inbox. She'd written what could only be described as a manifesto about my blatant disregard for community bylaws. She cited ongoing commercial use of my pool, noise violations, and unapproved guests, demanding immediate action and fines. But she wasn't done yet. The following weekend, I was peacefully floating in my pool when I heard sirens. 2 police officers showed up at my front door. I was still in my swim trunks when I answered. The officers were professional but firm, explaining they'd received a complaint about a trespasser and an illegal business being run at my address. I could see the neighbor watching from her yard with this triumphant expression, clearly expecting me to be arrested or at least heavily fined. I invited the officers to the backyard and showed them my ID with the matching address. I explained that I was the homeowner and this was my private pool. When they mentioned the illegal business complaint, I chuckled and explained I was a developer testing technology for my own company. The officers quickly realized there was no crime here and apologized for the disturbance. Before they left, they had a brief but stern conversation with the neighbor about misusing police resources. I watched from my pool as her triumphant expression melted into humiliation. She disappeared into her house and I didn't see her for the rest of the day. The next Monday, I went to my office and opened that HOA email. It was time to respond, but not as the neighbor she thought she was dealing with. I drafted a formal response as president of the HOA management company. The letter was professional and clinical. I stated that a thorough investigation had been conducted regarding her complaint against the owner of Lot 1. I systematically dismantled each of her claims, clarifying that use of personal property for personal enjoyment was not a violation and that no evidence of a commercial enterprise had been found. But then I pivoted. I noted that during our review, several potential violations had been discovered associated with her property that required immediate attention. You see, when someone starts throwing around HOA rules like weapons, it's only fair to make sure they're following those same rules themselves. I scheduled a professional land survey of her lot, which was my right according to the bylaws she'd been so eager to cite. The results were even better than I'd hoped. It turned out the stylish and expensive fence she'd installed when she moved in was 6 inches onto my private property. Even better, Its dark gray color had never been submitted to the HOA Architectural Review Committee for approval, which was a direct violation of the bylaws she loved so much. The survey also revealed that her meticulously planted prize-winning rose garden encroached on community-owned common land by over a foot. Every single rose bush was technically trespassing. I sent her a second formal letter, this one titled, Notice of Bylaw Violation. It detailed her violations in the same clinical language she'd tried to use against me: the unapproved fence color, the encroachment onto my private land, and the encroachment onto community common land. She had 30 days to repaint the fence to an approved color at her own expense, and to move both the fence and her entire rose garden back onto her property line. Failure to comply would result in daily fines of $50 per violation. The letter was signed by me as president of the development company, with my full name and title clearly printed. I made sure to include my business credentials and contact information so there would be no confusion about who she'd been messing with. I wish I could have seen her face when she opened that letter and finally connected the dots. The young guy next door she'd been harassing wasn't just some resident breaking rules. He owned the company, managed the HOA, and held all the power she'd been trying to wield against him. The transformation was immediate and complete. Within a week, I watched from my pool lounge chair as a work crew arrived at her house. They spent 3 days carefully digging up every single one of her prized roses and painstakingly moving her expensive fence 6 inches back onto her own property. The fence also got a fresh coat of approved beige paint, replacing the sophisticated gray she'd chosen. I have to admit, it looked much less elegant in the approved color, but rules are rules, as she'd been so eager to remind me. During the entire process, she avoided all eye contact. No more standing at her window with her phone, no more patrolling the fence line looking for violations. She'd learned her lesson about picking fights with people before knowing who they really were. To celebrate the peaceful resolution, I threw a pool party for my friends and the other neighbors in the community. Most of them were great people who'd never caused any problems. I even sent a friendly community building invitation to the problematic neighbor, though she obviously ignored it. The party was fantastic. We had great music, good food, and everyone had a wonderful time in the pool. The best part was that it was perfectly legitimate under all HOA rules, since it was a private gathering on private property with invited guests. Looking back, I never wanted any conflict. I'm generally a live and let live kind of person who just wants to enjoy his property in peace. But some people think owning an expensive home gives them power over their neighbors. They forget to check who actually owns the land their home is built on. The neighbor learned that lesson the hard way. She'd tried to use HOA rules as a weapon against someone she saw as an easy target. Instead, she discovered those same rules could be turned against her by someone who actually understood them and had the authority to enforce them. These days, my pool is quieter than ever, and the neighborhood is finally as peaceful as I designed it to be. The underwater drone still does its silent cleaning routine, and I still test new pool technologies when they come up. The difference is that now I can do it without some self-appointed enforcer trying to make my life difficult. I've heard through other neighbors that the problematic one has been much more pleasant since the fence incident. She apparently keeps to herself now and has even complimented other neighbors on their landscaping instead of looking for violations. It's amazing how quickly someone's attitude can change when they realize they're not the one in charge. I suppose there's a lesson there about the importance of understanding power dynamics before you start throwing your weight around. The funniest part is that if she'd just introduced herself politely and maybe asked about the pool equipment out of genuine curiosity, I would have been happy to explain it. I'm always excited to talk about new technology and innovative solutions. Instead, she chose hostility and got a very expensive education about the consequences of that approach. My company is working on a new development now, and I'm incorporating some of the lessons learned from this experience. Clear communication about community standards, proper neighbor orientation processes, and maybe some additional screening to avoid entitled troublemakers. But for now, I'm just enjoying my peaceful pool and my well-behaved neighborhood. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, especially when you have the power to ensure everyone else follows the rules they tried to use against you. The whole experience reminded me why I got into property development in the first place. Creating beautiful, peaceful communities where people can enjoy their homes without unnecessary drama. It's just unfortunate that sometimes you have to remind people what peaceful actually means. I still see the neighbor occasionally when she's checking her mail or working in her newly relocated garden. She always looks the other way when she spots me by the pool. I think she's learned her lesson about picking fights with the guy who literally owns the ground she's standing on. And my pool? It's still the perfect testing ground for new technologies, and it's still my favorite place to relax after a long day of work. The only difference is that now I can enjoy it without worrying about some self-appointed HOA enforcer trying to make it into a federal case. Some people say I went too far with the fence and garden situation, but I disagree. She chose to escalate things by calling the police and filing false complaints. All I did was apply the same standards she'd tried to hold me to. If anything, I was more lenient than I could have been. The truth is, running an HOA requires actually understanding the rules and applying them fairly. You can't just pick and choose which violations to enforce based on personal grudges. When someone demands strict rule enforcement, they better be prepared for those same standards to apply to them. These days, when I'm floating in my pool testing some new gadget or just relaxing after work, I sometimes think about how different things could have been. If she'd approached me as a neighbor instead of a prosecutor, we might have been friends. Instead, she chose to be an adversary, and learned why that was a mistake. The whole situation has actually made me appreciate my other neighbors more. They're genuinely good people who understand that community living requires mutual respect and common sense. They don't try to control what I do on my own property, and I return that courtesy. It's also given me some great stories to tell at business meetings and industry events. Other developers love hearing about entitled neighbors who bite off more than they can chew. It's become something of a cautionary tale about the importance of knowing who you're dealing with before you start making demands. But the best part is the peace and quiet. My pool is back to being the sanctuary I designed it to be, and the neighborhood operates the way it should. With everyone minding their own business and respecting each other's property rights, I suppose if there's a moral to this story, it's that knowledge really is power. The neighbor thought she knew the rules, but she didn't understand who had the authority to enforce them. She learned that lesson the expensive way, and now everyone benefits from the more peaceful environment. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd revealed who I was from the beginning. Would she have backed down immediately, or would she have found some other way to cause problems? I'll never know, but I'm satisfied with how things turned out. The underwater drone still maps my pool floor with silent efficiency, and I still test new technologies whenever they become available. The difference is that now I can do it without worrying about some neighbor turning it into a crisis, and when I invite friends over for pool parties, they're just that. Parties, not evidence of some imaginary commercial enterprise. We swim, we laugh, we enjoy the beautiful space I created, and nobody complains about noise that doesn't exist. It's exactly the kind of peaceful, high-quality community I set out to build. Sometimes you just have to remind people what that actually means. The really satisfying part came about a month after the fence situation was resolved. I was in my office reviewing plans for my next development when my assistant knocked on my door. She told me there was someone here to see me without an appointment, and she looked a bit uncomfortable about it. It was the neighbor. She was standing in my lobby looking extremely nervous and clutching a folder against her chest. When I came out to meet her, she could barely make eye contact. She asked if we could speak privately, and I invited her into my office. What happened next was probably the most awkward conversation I've ever had. She sat across from my desk, looking around at all my awards and development project photos on the walls, clearly realizing for the first time just how successful my company actually was. She started by apologizing for everything that had happened. She said she'd been under a lot of stress from her recent divorce and the move, and she'd taken it out on me unfairly. She admitted she'd made assumptions about me based on my age and appearance, and she was deeply embarrassed about calling the police. But then she got to the real reason for her visit. She opened that folder and pulled out some documents. It turned out she was having serious financial problems. The divorce had been messy and expensive, and she'd stretched herself too thin buying the house. The cost of moving the fence and replanting her garden had pushed her close to bankruptcy. She was hoping I might be willing to buy her house back from her. She knew I sometimes acquired properties in my developments for resale, and she was desperate. She even offered to sell it to me below market value just to get out from under the mortgage. I have to admit, I felt a little bad for her at that point. Yes, she'd been a nightmare neighbor, but seeing someone that desperate wasn't particularly enjoyable. I told her I'd think about it and get back to her within a week. After she left, I did some research into her situation. The financial problems were real. She was facing foreclosure within a few months if she couldn't catch up on her payments. The fence and garden expenses had been the final straw that broke her budget. I also learned more about her background. She'd been married to a successful businessman for 25 years before he left her for someone half her age. She'd gotten the house in the divorce settlement, but not much else, and she'd clearly been struggling to maintain the lifestyle she was used to. It explained a lot about her behavior. She'd been trying to exert control over something, anything, after having her whole life turned upside down. Unfortunately for both of us, she'd chosen me as her target. I decided to make her an offer, but not the kind she was expecting. Instead of buying her house, I offered her a job. My company was expanding, and I needed someone to handle homeowner relations and community management for my developments. It would be a decent salary with benefits, and she could keep her house. When I called her with the offer, she was shocked. She asked why I would want to help her after everything she'd put me through. I told her that everyone deserves a second chance, and her attention to detail and rule-following tendencies could actually be assets in the right context. She accepted immediately. She started working for my company about 6 weeks after our office meeting, and I have to say, she's been a completely different person. She's professional, thorough, and she genuinely seems to care about creating positive community experiences. The irony isn't lost on me that the woman who tried to enforce HOA rules against me is now my employee, helping me manage HOA relations across multiple developments. She's actually quite good at it because she understands both sides of neighbor disputes and knows how quickly things can escalate. She's also become something of a model neighbor. She keeps her property immaculate, follows all the rules to the letter, and she's even started organizing community events. Last month, she put together a neighborhood barbecue that was actually really nice. The other neighbors have been surprised by her transformation. Several of them have mentioned to me how much more pleasant she's become. She still keeps to herself mostly, but she's polite and helpful when people need assistance. Working together has also given us a chance to clear the air completely. She's explained more about what was going on in her life during those first few months, and I've told her about my perspective during the whole pool situation. We're not exactly friends, but we have a good professional relationship and we're civil neighbors. She's also been valuable in helping me screen potential buyers for my developments. She has a good eye for spotting people who might become problem neighbors, probably because she recognizes the warning signs from her own experience. The best part is that my pool area has become a genuine peaceful space again. She no longer watches from her window or looks for things to complain about. In fact, she's complimented me on the landscaping around the pool area and even asked for advice on improving her own backyard. Last weekend, I was testing a new solar-powered pool heating system when she came over to the fence. For a split second, I thought we might be going back to the old days of complaints and confrontations. Instead, she asked if I'd be willing to consider installing similar technology in future developments because it seemed environmentally friendly. We ended up having a normal, neighborly conversation about sustainable building practices and energy-efficient home features. It was the kind of interaction I'd hoped for when she first moved in, just about 8 months too late. The whole experience has taught me a lot about giving people second chances and looking beyond someone's worst behavior to understand what might be driving it. It's also reinforced my belief that most neighbor conflicts come from misunderstandings and poor communication rather than genuine malice. That said, I still keep excellent records of all HOA interactions and property boundaries. Trust but verify, as they say. The peaceful resolution with my neighbor doesn't mean I'll let my guard down if future problematic residents move into the community. My company has also implemented better new resident orientation processes based on what I learned from this situation. We now provide detailed information packets about community standards, HOA procedures, and developer contact information. We also schedule face-to-face meetings with new residents to answer questions and address concerns before they become conflicts. It's helped prevent several potential disputes in my other developments. When people understand the rules and know who to contact with questions, they're much less likely to make assumptions or take matters into their own hands. The neighbor situation has actually become something of a success story that I share with other developers. It shows that even serious conflicts can be resolved constructively when people are willing to look past their initial impressions and find common ground. These days, when I'm floating in my pool, testing new equipment, or just relaxing after work, I sometimes wave to her if she's working in her garden. She waves back, and we both get on with our lives. It's exactly the kind of peaceful coexistence I hoped for when I designed this community. The underwater drone still does its silent mapping routine, and I still test innovative pool technologies whenever they become available. The difference is that now my neighbor understands it's legitimate business research, not some mysterious commercial violation. Sometimes she even asks questions about the new gadgets I'm testing. It turns out she's genuinely interested in technology and innovation, which makes sense given how detail-oriented she is. We've had some interesting conversations about smart home features and sustainable building materials. It's funny how things work out sometimes. The person who caused me the most neighbor stress has ended up being one of my most valuable employees. She brings a unique perspective to community management because she understands how quickly small issues can spiral into major conflicts. More importantly, she's learned to channel her attention to detail and rule-following instincts in a positive direction. Instead of looking for violations to report, she helps prevent problems by ensuring clear communication and fair enforcement of community standards. The transformation has been so complete that when I tell this story to friends and colleagues, they have trouble believing it's the same person. She's gone from being the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer to being someone who helps create the kind of communities where enforcement is rarely necessary. My pool remains the perfect testing ground for new technologies, and it's still my favorite place to unwind. The only difference is that now I can enjoy it without any drama or conflict. Sometimes the best revenge really is helping someone become the person they were meant to be all along. And if future difficult neighbors move into any of my developments, I'll have an employee who really understands both sides of the equation and can help resolve conflicts before they escalate. It's turned out to be a win-win situation for everyone involved. The whole experience has also made me a better developer and community manager. I have a deeper appreciation for the stresses that can drive good people to behave badly, and I'm more committed to creating supportive environments where neighbors can coexist peacefully. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd approached her differently from the beginning, but I've learned not to dwell on hypotheticals. What matters is that we found a way to turn a negative situation into something positive for both of us and for the entire community. That's really what good development is about, creating spaces where people can thrive and build positive relationships with their neighbors. It just took a little longer and required more creativity than I originally expected. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This happened 5+ years ago, and it's still one of my proudest moments. I was dating this guy, Dan, going through a custody battle with his ex-girlfriend over their toddler. We worked at the same bar with this girl named Billie Jean. Billie Jean was an old friend of Dan and had worked with him before. She also had previously worked with the mother of Dan's child, Rachel, and everyone was seemingly friends and remaining civil. Or so I thought. Billie Jean had secretly taken sides and wrote a terrible affidavit lying about Dan. Dan somehow got a copy of it. I don't remember how the court process went. As I was reading it, I kept getting more and more irate. I hate liars, and one thing I really feel that crosses a boundary is using a child for leverage to hurt the other parent. Billie Jean was knowingly lying under oath and siding with Rachel to prevent Dan from parenting his kid, and he was by no means a bad dad. Well, Billie Jean had enemies. Enemies that I worked with and had easy access to contact. These enemies had sold Billie Jean a car that she wasn't paying them for. I didn't necessarily like the people who owned the car, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I called them up and told them I came in peace. I asked if they had Billie Jean's address to get back their car. They did not. I passed off Billie Jean's info and waited for her to call me. Now I was one of two people who could have ratted out the location of the car, and when Billie Jean called me to tell me her car got repoed, she said she had no idea who could have done it. It would have either been me or her ex, Robbie. I tell her casually, I don't think it was Robbie, and I swear up and down she responded with, well, who would have done it then? I held back laughter and finished the conversation with half-assed, oh, I don't know that TS so weird type comments until she hung up. Dan was next to me in the car, snickering. Dan won shared custody of his child, and Billie Jean lost her bar job because she didn't have transportation to work an hour away. To this day, I wonder if she ever pieced together that it was me. I don't like liars. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So I am a builder. I primarily do high-end custom homes, 4 million price range. I am a female, 34, which isn't common in this industry, but I really love what I do, and I am fairly decent at what I do. In the past, my projects were primarily in rural areas on large ranches, but this particular project is in the middle of a large city, which means there are neighbors in close proximity, which is something new for me to deal with. The neighbors around this area are some of the worst, entitled, nasty people you can imagine, and one of them is a celebrity and his wife, we will call her B, who is also well known. I haven't personally had too much interaction with the couple. When B goes walking every morning, I smiled and waved, which I do with everyone because this is Texas, y'all, and she would always ignore me, which honestly is whatever. I'm not gonna stop being kind because she is unfriendly. I honestly just started ignoring her. My job site has been really busy the last year, and most of my subs park alongside the street in front of the house. We all park on one side, facing the proper flow of traffic. If someone happens to park on the other side of the street, the neighbors call the cops, or the city building official. I find this incredibly annoying and childish, but whatever. I have my guys move, and it's not a big deal. That being said, I stop by my project every morning to line my guys out and check on work that has been done, make my lists, etc. Most of the time I park on the very right side of B's property, which is just to the left of my project's construction drive, so my guys have parking in front of the project house. I am not there long, usually 2-3 hours. One day I was outside the house and a woman approached me. I wasn't sure who she was, but apparently it was B's maid. She informed me that I needed to move my car, which was on the correct side of the public street, or B was going to call the cops. I looked at her and said there was nothing wrong with me parking there. The maid then proceeded to tell me that B was going to charge me $500 a day for parking in front of her house. I laughed and told the maid I didn't know they were that hard up that they needed to charge a parking fee for using the public street. I went ahead and called the police to get ahead of the situation. He informed me there wasn't anything B could do about me parking in front of her property, which I knew, but I could get a ticket for parking within 15 feet of a fire hydrant, which is on the property line between my project and B's house. The office informed me I needed to be 15 feet away from the hydrant. I thanked him and he left. So I did end up moving my car. I took my measuring tape and measured out 15, which put my almost smack in front of B's house. I decided to park in front of her front sidewalk for 2 weeks after that. Every time she does something rude to me on the street, which happens more than I prefer, I park in front of her house just to piss her off. Honestly, if she had just come to me in the beginning and asked me nicely not to park in front of her house, I probably never would have again unless absolutely necessary. But the fact she was okay sending her help to threaten me really pissed me off. Am I the a-hole for keeping this going? I don't like when people think that they are above you because they are well off. I know billionaires that have better manners than this chick. The next one is an entitled people story. This is my first post, so bear with me. I've thought about where to post this. I know there's a Clients from Hell sub, and I bet there's a You Just Can't Make This Stuff Up sub, but I've landed here at entitled. This happened a little over 2 years ago. My husband and I own and operate a small contracting business. We build fences, do dirt work, and kind of specialize in helping people set up their hobby farm. We were called by a couple who was a little outside our service area at 60 miles away, but we decided to go out to look at their needs anyway since we were going to be in that area on personal farm business. We arrived pulling a small livestock trailer that we had needed for our errand in that area. It was hovering near freezing and it was starting to mist. All of this becomes relevant in a minute. We arrive and the man comes out. He starts bouncing all over the property, telling us what work he needs done. I'm trying to take notes as best I can, practically running to keep up with him. Meanwhile, it's getting colder and the mist is becoming heavier. At that point, we arrive at his pig pen where we see one unfortunate male pig weighing about 50 pounds. Now, pigs like mud in the summertime, but I've already mentioned what the weather was like. The poor creature had absolutely no shelter, and there wasn't a square inch of space for him in the pen where he wouldn't be belly deep in cold mud. The potential client eyed us and eyed our empty livestock trailer. Then he starts practically begging us to take the pig, saying that since he had no shelter, he'd have to turn him loose in the neighborhood or **T him since an ice storm was coming in. Fast forward 5 minutes and my husband is standing in knee-deep, ice-cold mud trying to catch the unfortunate beast. We finally get him in the trailer and tell the potential client we will have to come back out to measure the fence lines and calculate how much gravel he needed for his horse pens because we were afraid the roads were going to start icing over. I went back out a week later for a follow-up visit. Again, we bounced all over the property. His 3-year-old came out and gave me a cup of water, which I obligingly drank before he said, "She can't reach the faucet. I'm not sure where she got that water." I told him it would take me a couple of days to research sources of gravel delivery in his area since he was a little outside our service area, but I would get back to him. Fast forward a couple of days. I did my research and found it would be cost prohibitive for him to have us do the work since we'd have to drive so far. And, frankly, a lot of stuff he wanted would have been best done by a high schooler for minimum wage than at our prices. Before I emailed him that we wouldn't be able to take the job, I reached out to a couple of companies in his area, confirmed they could do the work he wanted, and told them I'd pass their names along. Then I emailed him, gave him our regrets, which is more than most contractors do, and passed along the other company's info, which is way more than most other contractors do. I told him to give me a call if he had questions. He called me a few minutes later and I answered. He was disappointed, but I thought the call went well. Now here comes the entitlement. Within about 20 minutes, I got a notification that we had our very first 1-star review. It was his wife. She said we came out and told them we would do the work, and then, out of nowhere, we backed out. And we gave them our pig on good faith. This company is a scam. At no point did we tell them we'd do the work. We hadn't even begun to discuss price. The estimate, if we had even gotten that far, would have been free, and after I'd gone to the trouble of finding some companies better suited for them. She was mad because we'd turned them down. I didn't have her number, so I texted him basically, WTF? We will be there at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning with your pig. That was a bluff. There was no way I'd take that poor pig back to them. He texted back, I'm sorry, please keep the pig. My wife is pregnant and hormonal. I'll have her take the review down. Well, the part about the pig was removed within 5 minutes, but she left the rest of her nasty review. I gave her 24 hours to calm down, and she never took the review down. At that point, I texted him and said, she didn't do anything but remove the part about the pig. I think her review has more to do with her being an entitled brat than her being pregnant. I still get pissed off every time I see that review in our sea of 5 stars. Oh, we found the pig a good home. Also, I called the companies back I'd talked to on their behalf and told them to avoid that couple like the plague. Anyway,